So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. This is another one that was sent to me by Winged Swordsman 44. This one probably would have been out before the Toll for Last one, if I'm being honest, if I actually remembered to download the map pack at the appropriate time, just because it's a map we hadn't seen for a long time actually. I think it was before the current version of the game was the last time we saw this map, and it's kind of a strange one when you look at it. It's like the entranceway to one of the Mountain Pass maps, but it doesn't actually go into the mountain range itself as such. You've got these kind of wall-like structures which are made of bridges which the defenders can use as well, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how the bridges are necessarily going to work. I don't think there'll actually be too many pathfinding issues because they're kind of the only route that you can utilise in some respects to get to this little central island, for lack of a better term. So I don't think that there should be too many issues in that regard. I don't know necessarily how this map is going to shake up in terms of any sort of grace period, purely because Winged Swordsman himself is in a rather unfortunate position in the sense that he is cut off from his allies. I think he might have the opportunity to retreat into the hills over here. I'm not entirely sure. Actually, it's looking very much like he doesn't, so he is cut off. He might have to act in the role of reinforcements to the defenders that are already here if they're going to have any sort of makeshift rules applied to not simply overwhelming him and isolating him, because I don't think the battle is long enough for a grace period to be in place to allow the Gondorians to get over here and reinforce their fellow defenders. Now, I do believe this is a law-friendly battle in the sense that I think all of the attackers are equal and all of the defenders are good. But we'll go through that now, because there's nothing much else to really say about the map itself that we can do when the battle is actually underway. So we'll start off over here, I suppose, with Medexa, who is playing as Mordor, ever the classic force on the attack. We saw them go very much quality heavy in the last battle on Toll for Last, and ended up paying off for the attackers in that situation. Medexa has brought some Temple Guard. The armor-piercing arrows will of course be very, very handy. And they're also very strong in melee. Of all the armor-piercing archers, I think they are actually the ones that are the strongest in melee. The Wolves of the North don't have the armor values that the other two have, and I think the Blackshot Dragon Slayers don't have the melee defense. I think the Temple Guard are the, currently anyway, in the current version of the game, the best blend in melee. Obviously at long range, all of them are very, very deadly because of the armor-piercing arrows. The Orc Javelins are also armor-piercing, albeit of a very different level of quality. But they're very, very cheap, and time again we've seen them prove to be a really big annoyance for defenders because you have to deal with them. You have to shoot them either with arrows or sally out and deal with them in melee, because sitting there and allowing a unit like the Orc Javelins, who are very, very cheap, to get really good value off is a surefire way to allow the attackers to gain a lead from which you may not recover. The Nazgul are also here. We saw them be very useful. Well, I say we saw them. They got a lot of kills, but they do tend to blend in these battle replays, so it's very difficult to actually see them do their work. But yeah, very, very good unit to blend into your main Mordor army, and you can very, very quickly, as the defenders, find yourself on the receiving end of a pretty big kill count from these guys if you can't single them out and get other strong units in to deal with them. The Olag High, when it comes to breaking up a overly defensive pike and spear line, trolls are one way that you can do that. The Olag High are very effective, probably the single strongest unit of trolls in the game still. You know, decent armor values to them, very, very good damage of course in the way that most trolls do. But as with any troll unit, if you send them into the wrong target, especially high damage armor piercing shock infantry, and they're all on their own without support, they will get burnt down pretty quickly. Uruk Captains are here, the armor piercing bodyguard unit. I mean, they're relatively cheap as far as a bodyguard unit goes in this version of the game. And the armor piercing will certainly help them against most of the human kingdoms that they're going to be facing off against today. And the Uruk Captains also represent a pretty good bodyguard unit that you can use a little bit more freely as long as the general is not in there, because they can be embedded again into the more numbers heavy units, which you see to their right and our left. Plenty of Moran infantry going for a little bit more numbers than we saw Mordor go for last time. Moran infantry are not going to win any prizes for individual quality, but they're far from the worst unit of line infantry in the game, and they do have a lot of numbers. Their armour is the thing that will keep them alive a little bit better than most other things, but yeah, lots of them, so Mordor going for those numbers. The Orc Maulers are a cheap shock infantry unit as well, obviously very fragile both in terms of their lower armour values and their very low defensive stats. But decent attacking values for a unit this cheap. The armor piercing is always going to be helpful against opposition forces, And yeah, I mean, archers are going to be a problem for them, but they're so cheap that you could argue that you'd rather arrows hit them rather than other units that they also have at their disposal. Blackguard of Baroda, very good for dealing with defences that are dug in, that have been worn down a little bit. You can't send them in right away because the defenders will be able to simply bulk up on the front line and stop mass pushes, as we have seen in the past. They're no guarantee of pushing through a line, but again, big shield value as well, very much the opposite to the Orc Maulers, fantastic at absorbing arrow fire. Very rarely do you see archers actually deal with them though, because once they get committed forward, they tend to be put into the fight very quickly. So archers rarely have the opportunity to actually shoot them down anyway. Morannon halberds, the only polearm unit that Mordor have available to them, is a very basic unit of halberdiers, but it's better than nothing. And again, armour piercing. We've got the Minas Morgul's Chosen, which are a really heavy unit of spears. Of all of Mordor's frontline units, this is going to be the most dependable at staying alive, but they're also far from Mordor's best damage dealing option, but that's not really what they're designed to do anyway. And then we also have Morannon Guard, which is alongside the Orc Fodder. I mean, you see the Orc Fodder a lot because they're so cheap. The Morannon Guard you see a little bit more sparingly because they're relatively similar in price to the Morannon Infantry, which are better in melee against their fellow infantry. And they're more defensive. I mean, they can be good at dealing with cavalry, I suppose, but we'll see. Now then, moving on to Angmar. Again, we saw Angmar in the last battle as well. On this occasion, it looks like they've gone a little bit more quality heavy, but then this is always going to be a bit of a temptation with Angmar, because they do have a little bit more in their upper mid-tier to choose from. Witcher-Arm Hammerguard and Blackguard, both bodyguard units, and the Witcher-Arm Hammerguard have got the armour upgrade as well. Really strong armour-piercing infantry them, and the Blackguard are a very dependable sword and board bodyguard unit also. Blackwatch Legion, we've already mentioned the kind of unit they are in the Blackguard of Baroda. The Blackwatch Legion is simply a little bit less numerous, but individually have got better stats and thicker armour. Trolls of Gundabad and Trolls of Angmar, similar actually to the Olag High. The Olag High individually are going to be a little bit stronger, but the fact that Angmar have got access to 2 units of Trolls which do more or less the same thing means that they don't have to go into the red limit in order to bring 2 Trolls, which is a little bit rare. Guardians of Kharn with the armour upgrade and Witcher-Arm Pikemen with the armour upgrade make for a very robust front line that's difficult to deal with, especially in conjunction with the Barrow-wights that we see over there, the ultimate melee tar pit and kind of the ultimate range tar pit as well because of all of their hit points. And some Gundabad Guard also, which are a heavier unit of spears on a similar level to the Guardians of Kharn, only they have all of the advantages and disadvantages of being spearmen. Then we have the Wound Raider, who's playing as Rhudaur. Rhudaur are a very good supporting faction in the attack for reasons I've mentioned in the past. Plenty of damage, especially with their throwing projectiles, make them dangerous for any defence. Upgraded Rhudaur clansmen are probably Rhudaur's best option for a dependable frontline combatant in a situation like this, just because they've got a big shield. The armour the upgraded armour means that they're not quite as vulnerable as many of the other Rhudaur units can be to missiles. Speaking of which, we have Dunman Spearman and Dunman Pikemen, who don't really have the finest armour. Dunman Spearmen won't mind too much if they get shot at, though. I'm sure they will, but the commander of their army won't, because they're so cheap. Dunman Pikemen, on the other hand, they can punch above their weight if you commit them at the right time, so I'm sure the Wound Raider will be a little bit more cautious with them. Dunman Hunters, cheap archers of course for the attackers, are always going to be useful because it forces the attackers to do something about them. Not unlike the way we mentioned the Orc Javelins, it's a little bit less urgent that the defenders do something about a unit like this, but if you allow them to get a good kill count, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. But it can be easier said than done to actually deal with them. Maybe that can be Gondor's job in this battle. Crownodine Pikemen back here, a stronger unit of pikes, both in terms of their ability to kill enemy units, but also far more solid. They've got better armour, of course, although the shield is the thing that really sets them apart from most other pikes, and they can withstand a bit more in terms of arrow fire. Ferodrum Javelins and Etenmord's Troll Hunters, both throwing projectile units here, very, very strong. I'm sure there are Troll Short Axe throwers hidden amongst here as well. And also a bit of cavalry, maybe to prevent any sort of sallying out. 2 units of the Coldfell Maidens. It's been quite a while actually since we've seen the Coldfell Maidens. A very good unit of javelin cavalry. They are classed as, I think, spear cavalry and melee as well, so they've got a bit of an anti-cavalry bonus up close and personal too. So they make for a very good kind of defensive cavalry unit. And even if enemy cavalry doesn't sally out, they can still be used as javelins for helping to soften up those front lines. Moving on, we have Leech playing as the Orcs and Goblins of the Misty Mountains. Mostly Goblins, you'd have to say, with heavy Goblin Spears on the front line. Obviously a very numbers heavy faction, the Misty Mountains. Heavy Goblin Spears also have got that armour piercing, which makes them the most dependable frontline unit the Misty Mountains can field. They've got a better shield value as well than the other heavy Goblins, but they are more expensive. The heavy Goblin infantry back here are certainly nothing to write home about individually in terms of quality. We mentioned with the Moran infantry. The heavy Goblin infantry are a step down in terms of quality from them, but they are more numerous and even cheaper. So that's the name of the game here with the Misty Mountains. Just in behind them we've got plenty of Black Uruks, which represent probably the best upper quality unit of mainline forces that the Misty Mountains can field. Much more melee defense, they can go toe to toe with more units from other factions than most other Misty Mountains units that you can mass up. Having said that, there is also the Mountain Uruk host in behind. They're a little bit less damage focused than the Black Uruks in front of them. Much more akin to something like the Uruk-hai infantry from Isengard, but again, you pay a little bit more for them. This represents maybe the higher quality option that you can go for the Misty Mountains, so it's not impossible to go for an upper quality force with them, but it's very, very rare, and it's not too surprising to see the Misty Mountains go for quite a few heavy goblins in this situation as well. Goblin King's Bodyguard, which are a more numerous bodyguard unit rather fittingly, but as we have learnt, they are actually a little bit more worthwhile in taking seriously than you might think because of that. Those numbers really do help them, and they are still a multiple HP sword and board bodyguard unit at the end of the day, so they are still an impressive unit in their own right. White Uruk Fearmongers represent a better unit of halberdiers than the heavy Goblin halberds, which are actually not on the field today, interestingly enough. And then a couple of units of heavy Goblin crossbows as well, which, if they can get into the right position, then they could be very dangerous, but the defensive places the defenders can dig into here may make that a little bit more difficult than it would otherwise be. And then moving on, we have another Rhudaur army played by Sanket. He has got some Dunman Spearmen on the front, some upgraded Rhudaur clansmen in behind. He has gone for the Rhudaur Marksmen instead of the Dunman Hunters. Both of them are relatively similar in terms of the amount of damage and the amount of damage they can take and receive. The Rhudaur Marksmen are a little bit better in both regards, but what you're really paying for with the Rhudaur Marksmen is more ammunition. And generally speaking, we've seen Rhudaur able to maintain some sort of presence from their Rhudaur Marksmen throughout the whole battle, and the extra ammunition really will add up in the long run if the defenders allow it to. Rhudaur Swordsmen in behind as well. We didn't see any of them from the other Rhudaur force. The Rhudaur Swordsmen are a very basic unit of sword and board infantry, very similar actually to the Moran infantry, albeit they are, I think, a little bit better in terms of their baseline stats, but they don't have quite the same armour values as the Moran infantry. That's more of a guess than anything else, to be honest, but you're going to get something very similar out of both of them anyway, so it matters not. We have got some more Rhudaur Marksmen and some Ranodyne Berserkers and Essendon's Troll Hunters at the back. Now then, moving on, we have the first defender up here in their defensive position, going to be Imladris, played by Darthy Darth, already setting up a lot of stakes here, which looks intimidating, but it was, there's a very limited amount of cavalry that the attackers have anyway, so in terms of actual mechanical benefit, I don't think it's going to be too high, but Darthy Darth has got some Archers of Rivendell, armour upgraded. Obviously a good unit of archers. I mean, Imladris the least archer-focused elven faction, but they can certainly still do an awful lot of damage at long range, as you would expect. A couple of units of Norritano warriors, who are a little bit better in melee than the unit in front of them with their dual wielding. The Elder Runway archers are, of course, a massive step up in quality, both at range and in melee. The Elder Runway represent really what Imladris are all about, really high stats as most elven units have, but they twin this by having really high armour values as well, which really sets them apart from their elven brethren. We have the Riders of the Bruinen and Gwaithir Rockdale, so there is a defensive cavalry presence, so those Coldfell Maidens are going to be important, albeit the Riders of the Bruinen can keep them at long range, and Horse Archers are one of those interesting units where you're not going to see an immediate return on your investment with them. They're definitely a slow burn of a unit, and it's really all about trying to get a good kill count over a longer period of time, rather than blitzing something down quickly. Whereas in the last battle on Tolfalas, we saw the Gwaithir Rockdale used really well for the defenders. We'll see if that is the case once again. You kind of have to use them that well if you're going to bring a unit that's expensive. You need to get an awful lot of value with them. Just in behind, Viking Murdain with the armour piercing that they offer. Very, very dangerous indeed. We have the Elder Runway Spearmen representing a really solid front line, especially in conjunction with the upgraded Imladris and Guardians. obviously the silver and gold that are being worn, and several units of spears of Rhudaur as well, which represent a decent anchor for your line. They've always been the most underwhelming of the Imladris units for me, but they could very well prove me wrong on this occasion, and I don't think Imladris are going to have that. I mean, there's the God Helene, which are hiding. That's a unit, obviously, which has its special projectile, the Silverthorn arrows, but other than that, not much else. There's also some more Riders of the Roinin over here, some more Gwythi Arthand and Runway Swordmasters in this gap. Moving on to Hertu Mihai, he has got some, well, he is playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. We saw them turn to evil in the last battle on Tol Falas, but this time they are once again back where they belong. Obviously the Dwarves, when they're allowed to dig into a defensive position in the mountains like this, are very much at home, especially alongside the quality of the Elves and also the dependability perhaps of the Gondorians if they're able to actually get over here and give them a hand. Highborns of Erebor and Dragon Slayers, obviously the slightly better defensive unit, and then the Dragon Slayers add in armor piercing. Ironfoot crossbows could be absolutely lethal if they set up in the right position. You don't want to be using crossbows to counter skirmish with enemy archers though, so that is something they are going to have to stay cognizant of. We have Axguard of Erebor, we have Ironfoot spears, armor piercing, good defensive units as well. Ironfoot pikes are going to be really important. Imladris haven't brought their pikes today, which is somewhat surprising, but obviously the Ironfoot pikes are a little bit more cost effective, I suppose. Ironfoot axe throwers as well, going to be very useful for breaking up the enemy assaults, and a couple of units of Ironfoot crossbows as well. I don't know if there's anything we're missing in there. I don't think so. Plenty of Ironfoots, plenty of more of a numbers heavy dwarven build perhaps than you would normally see. There is the Blacklock Engineers, the body piercing crossbows, which are so devastating. Again, positioning is going to be very key with them. And last but by no means least, with the player who sent me this battle replays army, Winged Swordsman 44, playing as Gondor. He's got some civilians, he's got some Mithrandir's retinue, so another unit of cavalry, which is not cheap. Not quite as expensive as the Gwythi Rhudaur, but you're still going to need to get an awful lot of value off with this kind of unit if you're going to bring it. We'll see if the attackers can withstand it. Upgraded Axeman of Lasarnak, a nice unit of armor-piercing shock infantry, a good option to have. And we also have some Ravenhelms, which are not armor-piercing, but have got better baseline stats. A couple of units of Guards of Osgiliath. We've got the Citadel Guard, which of course are an armor-piercing spear. Fountain Guard, armor-piercing polearm unit, the Nimlothian Honor Guard, another armor-piercing spear unit, albeit this time a bodyguard version, and some Wardens of the White Tower, so both bodyguard units being brought, including the Mithrandir's retinue. That kind of makes it 3. Gondor archers with the armor upgrade, Marksman of Caer Andros, see another heavy archer, Veterans of Osgiliath with the armor upgrade, 2 units of them in fact, so I mean, all of these heavy archers would honestly make for a fantastic archer force to actually have in the defensive position from the start. So I don't know what sort of grace period is going to be going on here. In fact, I think, yes, we've got some Athelian Rangers over here, and the Wards of Minas Ithil, so a really high archer presence with the Rangers and the armor-piercing archers as well from Gondor. So I kind of think they are going to allow the Gondorians back into the defensive position. I think that's probably the right thing to do in this situation as well. If there was a way for Gondor to get through the mountains, regardless of how long it took them, I would maybe say that it would be okay to sort of begin the attack without allowing the Gondorians through, but as it is, I think because of the way the deployment zones work, it would be better to allow the Gondorians to dig in with their defenders, and it would also, they're also going to dovetail quite nicely, I think, with Erebor especially, because it means Erebor can use their crossbows a little bit more freely with all those Gondorian heavy archers doing the grunt work. Anyway, I'm going to make a cut because obviously I think the Gondorians are going to be allowed to march through. Maybe not, maybe the cut will be short, but we'll see. Anyway, I'll rejoin it when the battle is about to get underway. So the battle actually hasn't started in terms of blows starting to be struck just yet, but we are going to rejoin here because the Gondorians have just transitioned across into their defensive position, and the Wind Raider must have really enjoyed giving the Gondorian player, Winged Swordsman, a heart attack there, because he was getting very close with his Coldfell Maidens pretty much the whole time Gondor were getting into position, but no damage was actually done. Although very nearly actually, the Coldfell Maidens almost accidentally brushed up against some of the Gondorian pikes, so it would have spectacularly backfired on Rhudaur. That's that dangerous play that they are engaging in. Sanket also moving forward with his Blackwatch. It's only a matter of time now before the first arrow volleys are going to be coming forward from the defenders. In fact, I would say probably now is fair game, because you can see the attackers are starting to move up onto the same level as them. The dwarves deciding not to defend this little choke point over the dwarves taking responsibility for the middle for the most part, and I can understand why they don't want to defend here, because it is a little bit exposed. It gives the attackers a good opportunity to get their own crossfire going, which is not really what you want. You want to be having a good solid position where you can assist one another, and you can already see that the God Helene are in a really nasty position. It is interesting actually that the Black Bolts are the ones to go forward first, because they represent actually a perfectly valid target for the God Helene to go after immediately. You can defang Rhudaur by getting rid of some of their multiple HP units like that. You put yourself in a pretty good position for the rest of the battle. Now, they've got a little bit further to go actually before they can get into the Gondorian players' choke point. So that is something else worth bearing in mind. There are effectively 3 ways up into this defensive position. Now, they cannot get through this area over here. If they could pass under the bridge, it would be a much more difficult area to defend. There's nowhere really for the defenders to pull back to, although I guess, technically speaking, they could pull back to this little ridge over here if they really felt the need to, but that would be something of a panic button type moment, I think. There's no real need for them to do that. For the most part, I think. And the Goblin Infantry are going to be leading the way, not exactly the scariest unit you can have in the vanguard, but certainly one that you don't mind losing if you're the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. The Orcs and the Goblins and the Dwarves, natural foes of course. Further along, Gondor archers pulling back a little bit more. This is actually probably the best opportunity if you're going to have to use your cavalry if you're Gondor. If I were Winged Swordsman, I would actually be looking to utilise my Mithrandir's rescue. This is very weird. I mean, at this point, surely the grace period is over. There's no need to keep it going at this stage. Yeah, indeed, this is it. The Snarger skirmishes. If the defenders aren't going to initiate by taking the initiative with their own archers, then the attackers absolutely should be the ones to strike the first blow with their javelins here. Riders are joining up on the bridge. This is kind of why I was a little bit confused as to why the horse archers were brought, because unless you're going to have them out in the open field harassing the enemy, like, all they are really is a unit of archers that don't have as many men in the unit. Later on, maybe they could be used to break out of the attacking forces' lines, but I don't know. Snarger skirmishers continue to try and throw round the corner, so not the easiest shot to go after those iron-foot spears. Dunman Spearman moving up first, but they're not going to get very far against a very solid-looking Imladris front line. I put crossbows back there. Yeah, this is what I was thinking, we just missed it. Like, this is the ideal opportunity for the Mithrandir's rescue to get some really good value off and to start chipping away, really, at these barrow wights. I mean, this could actually be the end of the Mithrandir's rescue, though, because there is now no retreat for them, really. Not an easy one, at the very least, with the Dunman Spearman blocking said retreat off. This is perhaps, again, the ideal opportunity for the Coldfell Maidens to come in and mop things up, rather than allowing the Mithrandir's rescue at least the opportunity to try and retreat. Like I said, this may not actually be cost effective for the Mithrandir's rescue in the long run, but that was really the only opportunity I can see for defensive cavalry to actually be useful in this battle, which is, again, why I'm kind of surprised that they seem to have invested a decent amount in it. This is not really the map to be doing such things on, and Gondor and Imladris have both got units that you could otherwise spend the money on and be far more effective. When you're really digging into a position like this, I mean, there's a lot of damage already being done. Some of the Dunman Spearmen now retreating. 2 riders managing to make it back into the safety of the defensive line, so you have to say that wasn't terribly worthwhile. Civilians and Guards of Osgiliath will be enough to hold this at arm's length, but the barrow wights, of course, with their very low mass, are not going to be the ideal thing for breaking through pike blocks. The dwarves already being tested by the goblins, the goblin infantry moving in. I mean, the iron-foot spears do seem to have taken a fair amount of damage, actually, at the hands of those Snarger skirmishers in the end, so that'll be good value for the defenders. But the iron-foot spears will have absolutely no trouble in mopping up what remains of these goblin infantrymen. You can see still the Snarger skirmishers. I mean, like I said, the Snarger skirmishers, it's not a bad thing for the attackers that they've been mown down so quickly by the riders of the Thorn Rings. It's so cheap that they've done a decent amount of damage to the iron-foot spears, they've absorbed ammunition from the riders, they've paid for themselves. They've done their job. Blackwatch are here. The announcer seems to rate the defenders' chances rather poorly. I mean, this is a large attacking force after all. Dunman Spearmen and Rhudaur clansmen, so all of these are spears. all of which you would imagine are going to do relatively poorly against the expert infantry of Imladris. Further back, the Imladris Guardians watch on, waiting. Now Swordsmen. Infantry are routing, they've routed through the lines, so they are through the defensive position at this point. Again, more Barrow Whites as well, so Joran going to be sending his Barrow Whites in. This will mean that these front lines will last for quite a long time. And honestly, the Dwarves need to think about sending some reinforcements forward here, because these Ironfoot Spears are struggling already. Meanwhile, over on the other side here, this engagement also underway. The Gondorians giving the Dwarves a little bit of support. Ironfoot Pikes and Nimlothian honour guarding. Against pole arms, this is not a bad opportunity to send forward the trolls, as you can see from the Olag High already here. However, also you can see the clear projectiles already. The Athenian Rangers sensing an opportunity to do a lot of damage very quickly. None of these units are especially devastating, but this front line will hold on for a good long time with the support of those Rangers. Gondor archers shooting them into the massing attackers. Rhudaur clans are in position. The civilians are all gone already. The Athenian Rangers are pretty close to the front line, which does mean that any attacking archers could be useful. Dunman Hunters trying to get into a good position, and they will actually do very well. All of these Gondorian units that are currently marshalling this front line are unshielded after all. Maybe a little bit of a concern. Still those Athenian Rangers shoot. I don't think you actually need to shoot any more into that front line until more units arrive. But you've got to be really careful with your ranger ammunition. As high as the kill counts can rise, it's got to be against the right kind of units in a 5v3 in the current meta of the game. Otherwise, you're going to doom yourself in the long run if you have nothing to deal with the scarier units that the attackers have at their disposal. Plenty of those halberds have died in double quick time there. Gondor archers, so as we make our way back over here, I mean, those Ironfoot Spears have been run through. Ironfoot Pikes are going to back up the Elder Runway Spearmen on the front line now, but they need to be careful. I mean, this was pretty sloppy from the Dwarves, actually, to allow this to happen. They are going to be able to salvage it. These Heavy Goblin Spears were moments away, however, from actually being able to envelop this front line and engender a lot of chaos in this position, although this attack over here has gone about as well as you would expect. If you're only going to commit spearmen to this front line with a more limited amount of support, then against a force like Imladris, you're going to get rolled over. They are trying to utilise some range support, however, for often javelins as well, so good javelins. Any hits are likely to score kills, even on Imladris Guardians, and the elves can't really afford to take sustained losses like that, which is why Rhudaur are such an awkward force to fight. From javelins, of course, can hide anywhere, which makes the job of all these defending archers and crossbowmen and hunting them down just that little bit more difficult. The dwarves taking things a little bit more seriously now, with Erebor legionaries also joining in on the front line. None of these units, not even the Barrow Whites, who go a little bit berserk when this kind of engagement happens. Both a blessing and a curse. It means they can somehow manage to slip through enemy lines. You can say it's because they're phantoms, but of course everyone knows it's because the game is glitching out, because I don't know what element of the Barrow Whites caused them to do that, but as strong as they are, if they find themselves in and amongst all of this massive units, individual Barrow Whites will be wiped out really very, very quickly. Over here things are a little bit less erratic, and perhaps that's because they're not pushing quite so hard on this front line. Ravenhelm's actually not a bad choice of unit for facing off against the Barrow Whites, but the problem they have is more one of support. Dunman Hunters are in position, the Etanmor's Troll Hunters will be even more of a worry. Among the Rhudaur units as well, they actually have a decent armour score, so it's not the sort of thing the Gondorians can wipe away with archers in the same way that they could perhaps with Trollshore axe throwers. Moon Raider does have these Troll Hunters in a worrying position for Gondor. This is exactly the sort of attack which Gondor are very weak to, of course. Armour piercing never goes to waste against the Gondorians. Only the Ranger units are the units that's not really effective against. Maybe the Pelargian Marines as well, but even they, you know, armour piercing is going to be good against them as well. Phantom Guard moving onto the front line, out of ammunition. Gondor archers now pushing forward. As much damage has been done over here, still the attackers are putting good pressure on. Again, we've seen the sniper skirmishes already, the Orc Javelins, very much the same sort of thing. Doing a good amount of damage to the Gondorian defenders that are here. Defeat seems almost certain. Not terribly surprised by that, if I'm being honest. Gondor archers... Actually no, these are March and Andros using flaming shot, trying to break. Yeah, some more Troll Hunters actually doing a decent job of it as well. Gondor archers firing in. There's a lot of damage hitting them very quickly. Rhudaur plans on they've done a real number on that Gondorian frontline as well, just a single unit. As much as they have been dumpstered by the Gondorian archers, their job too has been done, and so far I have to say the attackers, even where they've been taking losses, they've been getting their value for money from their units. Perhaps a worrying sign, I'm not sure. Andros are there. The Legionaries' victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Very depleted Goblin infantry moving forward. You can see here though the Dwarven phalanx is most assuredly set. There's a few Highballs in there, a few Erebor Legionaries in there, acting as a good shield for the Ironfoot pikes as they continue to hold all of these goblins at arm's length. I think the effects volume is up higher than it was on my old PC, I must say. It's the sort of thing that's worth bearing in mind when it comes to the edit. Actually, no, I'm just gonna do that now. Cut it down by half. I think that's a little bit more reasonable. These Ironfoot pikes representing a very tough front line for the goblins to tangle with at the moment. They could do with some more of the low-tier javelins to give them a little bit more support. Meanwhile, over here seems to be the biggest assault so far, with the Blackguard of Baroda trying to push through the lines and succeeding as well. This will be a worry. I mean, stuff like Fountain Guard is not the sort of defence you can afford to let be overrun like this. Guard of Erebor from her 2 behind, moving forward to try and help plug the gap. There's going to be a lot of armour piercing damage, which should help turn the tide. I mean, this is the thing with the Blackguard of Baroda. They can push their way through the lines, but very quickly they can find themselves overwhelmed by their own mental weakness. Marksman Andros can more than look after themselves. Hold on a second. Happy middle ground, I think. Blackguard also pushing forward, so Angmar continuing to do their job as well. Gondor actually counter-attacking down here now. Citadel Guard and yet another unit of Guards of Osgiliath. I mean, the pikes have already shown themselves to be quite vulnerable in this sort of situation, and Rhudaur are taking advantage of their exposed nature. Coldfoul Maidens, but the Coldfoul Maidens have also been rapidly shot down. It is a sign of the kind of units that the Gondorians have been having to focus down with their archers, however. May yet act against them when it comes to having to deal with all of the scarier units of infantry that the attackers do have access to ultimately in the late game. Union Rangers there as well. They've been using their ammunition pretty liberally. And outside of the Blacklock Engineers, that's the only body-piercing projectile unit that the defenders have, and the Blacklocks are maybe a little bit more specialty in nature. You need a clearer shot to really get the most out of them. They, at their best, can be more effective at killing units more quickly. There's still more of a token effort of a defence, this one. And the Erebor front line continuing to do their thing, but you can see the javelins, like I mentioned. I thought this would be a good idea, getting forward some javelins to act as a supporting tool in this front line. I don't think it'll be enough to fully salvage the situation, especially not now that the Elven archers across the way are deciding to target them down. However, good enough damage. Just in behind you can see some Riders of the Groin in waiting. Still the Ironfoot crossbows. They haven't reignited the assault on the fully Imladris position just yet. Perhaps they're waiting for the opportune moment when more reinforcements are needed to be committed elsewhere, and they know they can commit everything they have and try and smash that Imladris defence to splinters. That will be when. They have managed to salvage this front line over here though. The arrival of the Guard of Erebor vital. That armour piercing will also help burn through the HP on these trolls just that bit more quickly. Crossbow starting to come into play now as well. Iron for axe throws, so Erebor. So far, we haven't seen much from the Erebor skirmishers, but they're starting to get involved now. And again, you don't want to wait too long to use your ammunition. If you do, by the time you come to use it, it's already too late. I don't know if they've necessarily got the best of angles here. Maybe they're getting good hits, but it's a long way for them to throw, and they've got to throw over their own men as well. I mean, they're going to be getting some hits, but it's not going to be necessarily the most efficient. This Gondorian counter-attack is still ongoing. What is also ongoing is still more javelins are hitting. Not that many though, with the Cold Maidens heavily depleted. Out of ammunition archers, however, make up an ever greater proportion of this little sally forth that the Gondorians are trying to enact. I don't necessarily think it's going to work. Defeat seems that only a military genius could win this battle, but I'm not surprised. Further afield. His army has taken a lot of losses, but he still has at least one more wave, and also that wave has got quite a few pikemen mixed up in it as well. Defeat is a distinct possibility for the Morano on guard. Balance of forces is evenly matched. Flip-flopping all over the place. They've got a perfect angle depending on what they want to go after, and they are going after Dunman pikemen, so they will get a lot of kills as they are. Good enough unit to go after as well. You don't want to get bullied into submission by low-end pikemen. Still not anything from the Elven front just yet. Forward come the Witcher-Armed Blackguard again. Joran moving forward aggressively. Witcher-Armed pikemen now backing things up, and this fight's starting to go south for the Wolves. No new reinforcements have arrived, whereas Angmar have been committing more resources forward. Highborns of Erebor. They were on the front line and then taken off, I assume because they were getting hit by javelins and they didn't want that to happen, but the price for that is, as soon as an opportunity has presented itself, Angmar have been more aggressive and have committed more high quality units, and now the Dwarves are somewhat scrambling to try and reform their defensive position. You can see the blood clouds being kicked up, and I think that's as a result of, based on the projectiles of the Viking Murdain. Renewed assault over here. This Imladris front line looking a little bit thin on the ground, and considering Blackwolds are amongst this attack, it's going to be a little bit scarier than the fully spear-focused affair that the initial attack in this position was. The Blackwolds may struggle a little bit against the Elves long term, but if they can do a decent amount of damage in the short term, that's all they need to do in a 5v3 siege like this. Spears of Rivendell have got an opportunity to really prove themselves here, but it's difficult against this number of opposition pushing into you. Another unit of Imladris Guardians is going to be needed to help cease any progress Sanket may have been hoping to make. Imladris Guardians in behind another unit of them. A few other units that can be committed. Most of these are archers. Rhudaur could be a late game threat at this point. Maybe that's what the idea was all along. More units being committed over here. Another full wave from the Misty Mountains to help follow up on the solid quality that Angmar have committed to the front line. That is going to be enough to start routing some of the more depleted Dwarven units. More is going to be required. They have reinforcements close by, it's whether or not they notice the amount of danger that they are in. The attackers are pushing pretty hard here in the middle. Axe throws are out of ammo just being sent in. You can see the armour-piercing projectiles from across the way, the ones at Minister Field shooting into this blob. And the Small Chosen are also in there. And that is a lot of damage. You can see that a lot of these orcs are wavering. Flaming shot being utilised to good effect as well. This is the thing, I mean, when you start pushing forward this amount of units as an attacking force, you need to see some progress, otherwise your manpower reserves can start to deplete pretty rapidly if the defenders are using their skirmishers to deadly effect. Citadel Guard charging down the hill, engaging with the enemy. More pikes are on the front line, not quite the Granite pikemen just yet, but that is a foe that the Gondorians are going to have to tussle with at some stage. Veterans of Osgiliath making their way into melee, they're going to be a little bit more handy than the Gondor archers we've seen on this front line up to this point. Horns of the White Tower still fighting hard. I mean, this is now a fairly depleted force actually, from an attacking perspective. Getting in position with more archers, capable of dealing more damage. I mean, this is a good amount of progress that the attacks have made over here though. The Blackwatch Legion causing real problems and maybe waiting a little bit too long to reinforce that front line and make things solid again. And good use of the Blackwatch Legion this, because it's going to cause panic in the defenders' ranks. The Blackwatch Legion will find themselves getting too deep into enemy lines, especially with Elder Runway Swordmass and Dragon Slayers of Erebor around. That will be enough to finish them off. Gwaith Arthand as well won't be too phased individually, but it's what follows the Blackwatch Legion which is always going to be the problem. And if the attackers are willing to really commit to this, then it's the sort of thing which could end up winning the battle for them in the long run. And you can see that that's what they're going to be trying to do. Some somewhat depleted Minas Morgul chosen, a fresh unit of Mountaineer at Coast going to arrive on the front line as well to keep the pressure on the defenders up. There's plenty of pikes in here. They've had to temporarily plug the gap with Riders of the Broinen, which, considering there are pikemen and trolls in here, that's going to end very poorly for these elven horse archers.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Falling back a little bit more on their on their crossbows, I should say. This could be what saves them in this situation, though. The Blacklock Engineers, they've got a decent shot. They're already causing problems in that blob. So this could be what makes it backfire for the attackers. It's the right idea from the attackers, it's just whether or not the defenders have the tool able to respond to that. This Rhudaur assault is once again starting to falter in the face of this elven quality. So far, I think Imladris will be fairly pleased with how this has gone. Most of the damage they've taken will have been at the hands of the Blackwolds while they were still more active, but it's mainly been supporting javelins which have been trying to chip away at the Imladris strength. The God Helene are firing across the way as well. Heavy Goblin crossbows are in position now as well though. Bit of counter skirmishing perhaps. Heavy Goblin crossbows trying to deal with the Blacklock Engineers, but it might be a little bit late for that. I mean, there is a huge pile of corpses. You can see the red capes of the dwarves, you can see what's left of the phantoms. Minas Morgul chosen continuing to push, but the Viking Murdain have now also been committed to this fight. That level of armor piercing damage is going to be really nasty. Blacklock Engineers doing their thing. Is this assault? Oh, this assault completely fell apart at some point, maybe as a result of the attackers wanting to commit more over to the other side to try and capitalise on that momentum, but as a result maybe leaving themselves a little bit undermanned over on this side, and the Wardens of the White Tower will end up perishing as a result of maybe chasing the enemy a bit too far, but it is a sign of how this fight has been going if the defenders have been able to push back what started off as such a scary force. Again, another huge pile of dead bodies. I think the initial choke points, all four of them, are going to be where this battle begins and ends, really. Any sort of battling that happens after that will either be out in the open field as the defenders chase down what remains of the attackers, or will be in and amongst the defences as the attackers overwhelm what remains of any as yet uncommitted reinforcements. Maximum of the Sarnacle in there is Metamor's Troll Hunters, utilising their javelins, still some ammunition from the Athelian Rangers, Quantum Minutes of Leo firing into that blob over there. I mean, the engagements as they have been, as a result of the defenders' skirmishes and their positions, it's been very painful for the attackers so far. It's just whether or not the defenders have enough ammunition to sustain this, and whether they've done enough damage already to have a shot at victory. The announcer would guess at no. I'm amazed actually that these trolls are still alive. The Blackguard of Erebor over here, that armor piercing damage surely is going to hit home on the trolls now, and they've already been in this engagement for a little while. Still that elven quality in there as well, but quite the art damage. I mean, this has been a really heavy metal fight over here, and the Whitey Armband is still pretty healthy. It's a sign of how really tough they are to kill. Again, they're not the most damaging bodyguard unit by any means. They kill things relatively slowly thanks to that spear malice, but very, very tough to bring down. On the other side of the spectrum, the Viking Murdain, as a result of them being a Warhammer unit, they don't have a higher melee defense than many of the elves have. This is a bit of a kamikaze move from Darty Dart. There's no way should this cavalry be trying to push its way through this line now of all times. Maybe he's just trying to get them around this area, because pushing through this line when most of it is made up of Witch Realm pikemen seems suicidal. There's still a few trolls in here as well, which you can do good damage to trolls off a charge, but not like that. Drake Broodlings have managed to push through the lines as well. And now they're going to try and feast upon things. Trying to make the fight chaotic is exactly what the attackers should be doing. Sending their own men flying. They need to keep the Drake Broodlings moving though. The longer they stay still, the more damage Axe Guard and the like are going to be able to do. Just a Rhudaur. Dealing with what remains of those heavy goblin crossbowmen. Still, another unit of Black Walls has been committed by Sanket over here, but individual units like this, the attack over here has been something which fewer units have been committed to. It must be said. There goes the Angmar general. Most of the Angmarim that remain are high tier though, so I don't know how significant an event that is. Balance of forces is evenly matched. There are more reinforcements yet to come from Sanket, and a fair few of them as well, but he hasn't been moving at the same pace as his allies have. And the problem is, if all of his allies, you can see what way the tide is flowing over here. Angmar are starting to rout on that, so the death of that general proving to be significant. Not many of the goblins remain either, and when they're standing alone in the face of such opposition, they are going to rout in short order as well, I would imagine. Marksman. Still, the announcer doesn't rate the defender's chance all that highly as we move into the final 10,000 frames. Marksman Karandros being tasked with holding the line. Make for a good melee combatant, but Black Orcs are dedicated heavy swordsmen. Rhudaur continuing to pressurise what's left of the Gondorian front line here. There's really not that much left in terms of units that can be committed for the Gondorians either, so given the fact that the Rune Raider does have his front line pikemen still in reserve back over there, and he's got Dunman pikemen on the front line over here with Rhudaur clansmen guarding their backs. Not going to have much left from Rhudaur, but as soon as those front lines are committed forward, you would imagine that slowly but surely they will gain the upper hand over here. Whether they'll actually have enough to cause the attackers to win via domino effect in the rest of the battlefield, I'm not sure. And also, Warns of Minister Theo, they're a multiple HP unit, they're not the best melee combatant among this class, but they are still another challenge for the attackers have to deal with. That is probably the Mordor general. Ironfoot crossbows also being added to the front line, but White Orc Fearmonger, so this is going to be where we learn if the defenders have done enough damage with their skirmishers, but the attackers in their big moments, they may well have been forced back from the front line here, but they will have done damage. The question is whether that will be enough, and I'm not sure. Look at the situation here, I think Rhudaur are starting to, as a result of Sanket still having maybe a little bit more left in the tank, they are starting to pile the pressure on Imladris over here. individual these elven units. God Helene here, who they'll carve their way through Rhudaur clansmen and swordsmen on a one-to-one basis, but it's pretty far away from one-to-one at this point. They are receiving some support from the archers in the background, and Imladris guard is moving forward. More reinforcements are needed to keep this momentum up for Rhudaur. And the price for not doing so may ultimately be defeat, because the units that are here are not going to be able to sustain this for too much longer. More swordsmen moving forward. Even the archers of Rivendell, like elven archers, can look after themselves well enough in melee, and it's the sort of thing which is going to add up in the long run. Runway Spearman. A little bit banged up at this point, only 56 remain. Northern Javelins have been, thus far, looks like it's the most effective unit. They've been a bit of an ever-present, but they've also been hit as and where they can by the elven archers. I don't think the attackers are going to have what it takes, numbers-wise, to be able to open up this one line over here again. I think there's going to be more if they can do the business over here. The centre of this effort is going to be those white Uruks. Armour-piercing polearms are going to be really good against both the Gondorians and the dwarves. Drake Broodlings running off. That's not an Erebor. The balance of forces is evenly matched so far, which doesn't surprise me too much. It's just, I think, the fact that there are polearms on the front line here for the attackers give them the slight edge, and I don't know if there are any more projectiles that the defenders can fall back upon. I mean, that's pretty much it. Rhudaur have now sent forward everything they have, but everything they have is going to be enough. The Gondorians have finally been defeated over here, and they do have enough left here in Rhudaur to be a major problem. His retinue, surely this is going to be the end of him. After the early game, the attempt was made, but ultimately their fate was always going to be rather sealed by the way that they were utilised. Is he going to be able to get away? He is. Writing surely on the wall for him though. Swordless, another across. Some units that are reserved here. Wifey Rhudaur could maybe look for a way to break out into the open field. We've seen how effective they can be on the defence recently as well with the Battle of Tonkalas. Can they be utilised to similar effect again? I think on this occasion, if they were, that would be enough, I think, to give the defenders victory. They are running out of time to do that with the momentum Rhudaur have on the other side. Rhudaur are struggling more so over here against Imladris, but it's a difficult matchup for them. The armour piercing is useful against Imladris, but you need more than that. The Gondorian general abandoning his post. There he goes. The Wifey Rhudaur are here. I mean, Joran needs to wake Catcher and Pikeman up and deny them their retreat, because otherwise the Wifey Rhudaur will manage to charge these heavy goblin crossbows into oblivion. And keeping these crossbows online is another way in which the attackers can hammer home their victory, I think. But more charges like that, and their fate in this battle might be somewhat different. It's going to be enough to rout them. They are going to. It's going to require one more charge. The quicker they can deal with these heavy goblin crossbows, the quicker they can get on to the business of charging into the backs of these units over here and trying to break up this assault. Is it going to be enough? Wifey Arthand standing more or less alone. The Viking Murdain, it's almost like 300 style as they wait for the horde to cross the bridge. Ranodyne Pikemen in the vanguard, 138 of them are going to be difficult to bring down for a weary defending force. Still 9 Dragon Slayers. And they're struggling a little bit with all the dead bodies in close proximity to one another. Still, the elves fighting hard, and another unit of Rhudaur Swordsmen being committed forwards. Seems certain only a fool could lose this battle. Not warriors firing into that blob. this is necessarily the best angle, and efficiency with archers is all too important here. I mean, the temptation obviously is to simply get your arrows down range before your front line falters too much, but you can't afford to be wasteful with any of your projectiles at this point, and looping your shots like that is going to come back to haunt the elves, I think, because those Norotino warriors could be all important if they still have ammunition left to a significant degree. This is all well and good, halting the advance of the Granadine pikemen, the Rodram javelins and the black bolts, but do they have projectiles to take advantage of this? I think the axe throwers maybe have a couple of volleys left. I mean, we've been seeing them fairly consistently throughout, but by the looks of things, Viking Murdain and Viking Archan dealing with the black bolts that are trying to slip through the lines. It's been a valiant effort this from the defenders, but more and more you're sensing the attackers might just have a little bit too much for them in this situation. Defenders have got to play efficiently and take their chances where they can. I think just a bit more often than not in this fight we've seen examples of the attackers able to manipulate the odds of the fight in their favour. Yes, there have been pushes and engagements that have ultimately fallen apart for the attackers, but I don't know if that's proven to be enough. Coldfell Maidens very, very depleted at this point. I mean, here are the Gwythy Rockdor. This is maybe the saviour of the day, but more riders are being lost. More riders are being lost to baited Rhudaur Swordsmen. As many charges are being committed to, it's going to be difficult for these riders to sustain the level of pressure that may very well be required. Also, we're starting to see Granadine Berserkers on the front line. They will be able to give the remaining Imladris forces a real run for their money. Units of genuine quality. Presumably they've used their throwing projectiles as well, so softened Imladris up a little bit with their throwing axes first. Other Runway archers in a good position, so they still do have skirmish ammunition. They haven't just dumped it all and wasted it, the defenders, but the way the battle has fallen, it's one of those where you can't really point to any one thing. I just think the attackers have done quite well. It's also quite a difficult map to defend. As much as its choke points and crossfires have been set up quite well by the defenders, it is quite open. And we have seen more than one occasion, in this battle, especially the attackers' javelins used very nicely. Rhudaur continuing to pile the pressure on. Norotino warriors joining the front line now as well. They'll do quite well against the Rhudaur units they can reach in melee, but those pikes are going to prove to be a problem, and the Gondorian dregs have now been overrun by Goblin King's bodyguard and Blackwatch. They're all very bloody here, the remaining forces of the Misty Mountains, but they're going to come to Rhudaur's aid and sandwich what remains of Imladris over here. Imladris really the only defenders left with any significant force on the field now. If you're going to have one army left, then this would maybe be the one you would pick early on. But I don't think it's going to be enough. Another 83 Rhudaur Swordsmen, recommitted forward. Still yet more than Imladris. They're going to have to be hacking their way through. So they're just going to commit everything at this point and try and overwhelm what remains of the defence over here. Sankit hasn't been able to fully smash his way through this defensive position, but there has been a bit of a theme in this battle so far. The attackers, the only defensive positions they've really managed to get through, well, that one over there was really the only one. This one, you could view this fight over here as a continuation of that one. The attackers will be able to get through. There goes the Rhudaur General. More basic units are shaken. Those Dunman pikemen represent a not insignificant amount of these units, but I think it's a little bit too little too late, is what I would suggest. Viking Rockdor are rousing as well. I thought they were coming in for a charge, and even 4 of them alone is enough to do a fairly decent amount of damage, but they are rousing. Perhaps that's a sign of things to come. For the rest of the remaining defenders, those Elder and my archers have been doing a good amount of damage to Rhudaur, as they've been making the attempt to finally deal with the Elven position, and it looks like they're going to. As much as the attackers do have a decent amount left, I mean, having a look at the percentages, 3% in favour of the attackers. That's not the sort of thing the defenders are going to be able to claw back from here, I wouldn't have thought. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the kinds of units that are here as well, there's nothing really exceptional. I mean, the Frownline Berserker is really the only thing, and there's only 20 of them remaining from javelins, but it wouldn't have taken much to turn this battle the other way. A couple more volleys here and there from something like the Blackwatch Engineers would have been all that could have taken, actually well placed. As it is, it's just going to be the slow road to defeat, unfortunately, for the defenders, but a valiant effort nonetheless. Very similar to Top Class, actually, where you can point to things that the defenders did well, but in the end you're always under the cosh in a 5v3, and efficiency is 9 times out of 10 the reason why the defenders don't win this one. I think just a couple too many volleys from the Athelian Rangers into a low tier blob. I mean, you're going to get a lot of kills, but your infantry can handle low tier stuff like that. You need to have something capable of blitzing the enemy down in the late game when the attackers are still going to have a decent amount of manpower to their back, unless the attackers really go crazy and start throwing things forward very early doors, dumping all of your ammunition into the initial engagements from high tier stuff like ranges maybe isn't the plan. That would maybe be where I would say. I mean, the margins are so fine that that's kind of the only thing I can say that I would have done differently perhaps. Still have a bit of ammunition so they can shoot Rhudaur as they come across the bridge. Rhudaur are not going to be the best under this kind of attention from the Elder Archers. I was going to say, do they still have ammunition? Well, I'm not sure if they can make up their mind. There's one Black Orc over here who tried to interrupt them and ended up getting gutted for his troubles. The Rhudaur clansmen will be hoping to get up into the faces of these Elder Runway Archers before anything else can occur. I'm going to take this to mean that victory is very close over here. You can still see the quite the outcome. There's still 16 of them left, even though this has been the shape of this engagement over here for a little while at this stage. Of all the units we've seen what they're about perhaps more than any other single unit on this occasion, just because of how much punishment they've taken and the kinds of engagements they've been in, and still stayed standing for a remarkably long period of time. Seems certain only a military genius could win this battle? Surely not. Rhudaur just needs to send everything forward. Again, I'm a little bit surprised that Sankat has once again just sent forward the dregs of his army. At this point in time, the outcome of the battle is basically guaranteed, so there's no need to be concerned, but I would have thought he'd want the glory of bringing the Elder Runway Archers down. He may be denied that if the attackers on the other side can get over here quickly enough. He's got one Crown Line Ranger left. We didn't see them actually shooting their projectiles, but one could surmise that over there was where they were used, as with most of the other Rhudaur ranged units that the Moon Raider had at his disposal, and that's maybe part of the reason why Gondor struggled a little bit to hold on to that position, at least from a melee perspective. The ranged units Gondor, I'm sure when we look at the splash screen, seeing as we are going to be viewing this from Gondor's perspective, I'm sure that they will have racked up a very high amount of kills indeed. On the Frownline Pikemen as well, so I think this is going to end in a rout from the Elder Archers, because I don't think with the frames left, Rhudaur and the Misty Mountains have what it takes to bring the Elder Runway Archers down. The balance of forces is evenly matched, is it?
Our enemies have snatched
And there we
victory
go.
from us like thieves in the night. We'll not be so lucky next time.
Yeah, 3% seems fair, and like I said, fine margins. The reasons that I've already mentioned, or the things I've already mentioned, would have been what I would have done differently. So the Rangers may be a little bit more conservative early on, and then you will have more later to be able to do the business. The Blacklocks actually I thought were used as they needed to be. In order to cease that assault, the Blacklocks were needed, so I think you couldn't really have done anything differently there. I still feel as though the cavalry didn't pay for itself on this occasion. Certainly not the Mithrandir's retinue, and I don't think the Gwaithly Rhudaur did ultimately either. And that's high-tier units potentially that you're missing out on. In particular, immediately from Imladris' perspective, what you would do is trade out the Gwaithly Rhudaur for at least one unit of the Imladris sentries, and maybe throw in an extra unit of Swords of Rivendell as well for the price that you would get, and maybe tweak your army just a little bit, and then you've got 2 more defensive units, which a unit of Imladris sentries and a unit of Swords of Rivendell, probably enough to turn this battle around, to be honest, especially given the fact that Imladris sentries would make it Sanket's progress even harder against the Imladris position over there. The Gondorians as well. I mean, most of the high-tier Gondorian stuff was here, to be fair, but you could trade in those Mithrandir's retinue for maybe another couple of units of unupgraded Axemen of Lasarnak, and then you've got a little bit more armor-piercing bite, which you could send over to maybe help the dwarven positions in the middle, and then you could transition more of your defensive units over to help deal with the Rhudaur push from the Womb Raider. That's maybe what I would do from a composition perspective as well. That could turn the battle around. I mean, the margin's so fine that small adjustments are all that's really needed. But other than that, I think the attackers were worthy victors. Like I said, they did really well, especially with their javelins, to weaken the enemy lines up just enough so that their numbers could then do the rest. I mean, having a look at the sizes of the armies, you can see Angmar noticeably smaller, but then they went for trolls, barrow wights, elite units, and even their mainline units they had were sort of their upper mid-tier stuff with the armour upgrades slapped on, so certainly a more high-quality approach, but it ended up paying off. Having one high-quality army, and especially when Joran decided to be aggressive, the high numbers of Mordor and the Misty Mountains and Rhudaur were always there as well to help keep the pressure on. It was a costly affair, you have to say, for the attackers, but they got the job done. So, Winged Swordsmen, yeah, Athelian Rangers, 478 kills is fine, I suppose, but given the kind of blobs they were shooting into, I was kind of expecting to see like 600 plus. Again, this is the sort of thing which Rangers can do fairly easily in this version of the game. Obviously that will cease to be the case as we march ever closer to the release of the next patch. Wounds of Minas Ithil, obviously armour piercing. It's hard to tell what they were actually hitting in the blobs. I think they were going after stuff like Minas Morgul's Chosen and such, but yeah, I mean 233 kills is a fine number, but it's hard to say whether that was worthwhile because we don't know what was actually killed there. Gondor archers doing reasonably well, Wounds of the White Tower doing fine on the front line, Marksmen of Caer Andros and veterans obviously chipping in melee after they had run out of ammunition as well. All of the Gondorian units outside of the initial ones that were going up against Rhudaur, so civilians, both units of pikes, and obviously the Ravenhounds that we saw as well, that initial semi-sally forth from Gondor wasn't really all that successful, and Rhudaur were able to counteract it quite well, but other than that, there's not really much else to be said, I suppose. Well played to the attackers. Big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this one as well. This is a map we've seen before, like I said in the intro, but it's not one that we've seen, I think, in this version of the game, so it would have been a long time ago when we last saw this one. I don't know what this map is actually called, but I'm sure I can do my research to shed some light on that. But yes, what's going to be coming out soon, I've got a replay on the Temple of Melkor, actually from the Womb Raider, so that's going to be probably be the very next replay to come out, actually. Also got a free-for-all on a Mountain Pass map from him also, so that's going to be something else to look forward to. As far as what's going to be coming out, following on from that, got probably another one of Winged Swordsman Sieges that he sent me. I've got one on the Ardenheim Outpost. Then maybe we'll go back to Silmarillion and do the replay that Lord of Belagos sent me. And then moving on from there, who knows? I mean, planning any further than a couple of weeks in advance is fairly difficult. Once again, I'm just trying to record as much as I possibly can before the spectre of being sent away for work once more may very well fall upon me, but we shall see. Hopefully by the end of the year, as I keep saying, that will cease to be a problem. But yes, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.